कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to greet you all today to this webinar. On behalf of the Department of Commerce, afternoon and evening section, and UG and PG of the Bhawanipur Education Society College. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome and a hearty welcome rather to all the dignitaries present here, faculty members and students. I would also like to take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Partha Ray, Professor of Economics, Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, as our keynoter for the webinar on COVID-19 and the Policy Conundrum, a deliberation on fiscal and monetary policy decisions during the pandemic. Fiscal and monetary policy have always been integral in maintaining economic stability. In the wake of the pandemic, though, when everything came to a startling halt, the global economy too was thrown off balance. This unprecedented economic crisis had the policymakers on their toes, trying to devise new ones to contain the disruption that the lockdown had already caused. Perhaps it is now the time when fiscal and monetary policies fall in sync. Perhaps that will ensure some amount of damage control. On that note, may I request Professor Paramita Chakraborty, Coordinator, Department of Commerce Post-Graduation, to please deliver the opening address.
Thank you, Arundhati. Respected resource person, Professor Dr. Partha Ray, respected Head of the Department, Commerce, Afternoon and Evening, Professor Shashko Chakraborty, participants from different colleges and universities, and my dear students. India has become the world's new hotspot for the COVID-19 pandemic as infection cases have surged in recent weeks. On September 7th, India overtook Brazil with 4.2 million confirmed cases to become the country with the second highest number of confirmed cases in the world. And on September 16th, the total number of confirmed cases surged past 5 million. In the second week of September, in fact, new COVID-19 cases averaged nearly 90,000 per day in India. While the world is currently witnessing the second wave of the infections, India has failed to flatten the first wave curve. If the current trend continues, India may soon become the world's worst hit country, surpassing the United States. The abrupt nationwide lockdown imposed across India was the biggest in the world. The, the lockdown restrictions were imposed without any preparation or coordination with the states. It was also one of the most stringent lockdowns enforced in the world. Except for some essential services and activities, the rest of India's $2.9 trillion economy remained shuttered down during the lockdown period. The lockdown had devastating effects on the already slowing down economy and people's livelihood as shops, eateries, factories, transport services, and business establishments were closed. As per the official data released by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, the Indian economy contracted by around 24% in the April to June quarter of this fiscal year. This is the worst decline ever recorded since India started compiling GDP statistics on a quarterly basis in 1996. The first image of COVID-19 that India associates with are of the migrant laborers who were moving back to their villages, losing their livelihood. In the first wave, it is estimated that around 10 million people returned to their villages and towns, dragging their belongings and family children. After the economic stoppage, the International Labour Organization has forecasted that 400 million people in India risk falling into poverty. The government's crisis response was a fiscal stimulus of 20 trillion rupees, almost 10% of GDP. Also, Reserve Bank of India enacted decisive expansionary monetary policy. But banks accessed only 520 billion rupees out of the emergency guaranteed credit window of 3 trillion rupees. S&P Global has a grim outlook for the banking sector, and according to the rating agency, in India is dealing with a 13 to 14% spike in non-performing loans from total loans in the current fiscal. The National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme and supply of subsidized food grains have acted as useful buffers, keeping unemployment down and ensuring social stability. But MNREGA has an upper limit of 100 days guarantee employment, and it does not cover the urban areas, and agriculture cannot absorb more labor, resulting in disguised employment. A post-pandemic survey shows that the MSME sector expects earnings to fall in 50% this year. The path ahead for the economy will obviously depend on the path of the virus. The situation looks very dismal. Today we have with us Professor Partha Ray of IIM Calcutta, who will be enlightening us on the theme of this webinar, and I am sure after his discourse, we will be more knowledgeable about the current situation. Over to you, Arundhati.
Thank you, ma'am. May I now request Ms. Shukarna Chatterjee to please introduce our keynoter, Dr. Partha Ray.
Good evening to one and all present here. It is indeed my great privilege to introduce our speaker of today's evening, Dr. Partha Ray. Dr. Partha Ray currently is a professor of economics at Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. He completed his MSc from University of Calcutta and went ahead to complete his PhD from University of Mumbai. Before joining IIM Calcutta, Dr. Ray had held the position of Director, Reserve Bank of India, Mumbai, in the Department of Economic and Policy Research. Prior to that, he had held the esteemed position of advisor to Executive Director, International Monetary Fund, Washington, D.C. Dr. Ray has been part of prestigious projects like State Finance of West Bengal for Niti Aayog in 2018, fiscal implications arising out of implementation of 5th and 6th Pay Commission on finances of union and state government for 7th Central Pay Commission in 2014, and gold as a formal investment asset, possible contours of a people-oriented gold policy in India for World Gold Council in 2013. He has a number of research publications to his name. Dr. Ray has attended national and international conferences like Conference on the Political Economy of Contemporary India 2018, IGIDR, Mumbai and International Academic Conference on Economics, Prague 2017, to name a few. He has authored, co-authored, and jointly edited a number of books, few of which are BRICS, The Quest for Inclusive Growth, Volume 1, Macroeconomic Policies for Emerging and Developing Countries and Commercial Banks and Monetary Policy in India. Dr. Ray has varied research interests such as macroeconomics, banking, and global political economy. His extensive body of work speaks volumes about the cogent grip he has over his subject and allied domains. Both in academics and industry, Dr. Ray has gathered years of experience, which makes him the erudite personality that he is. Today, we are most certainly honored to have an individual of his stature among us as the keynoter. So, without much ado, I wish to invite Dr. Ray to please address the audience.
Thank you very much. Have I been made a presenter? So I have a PowerPoint which I wanted to share.
Yes, sir. Sir, will you be able to present it?
Yeah, I'll be able to present it. That's not
all right.
I'm just seeing, but I'm not seeing that sharing. Just a minute.
On the right hand side of your screen, right below, there's a present now icon.
Yes, I thought as much. I have.
And sir, if you can just click on your entire screen.
Present now. Entire screen or a window?
Sir, okay, a window. Or if you could click the entire screen and then go ahead with that. And sir, you can go on to the tab that your presentation is open on.
Okay, just a minute. Yeah, I'm
sure, sir.
Maybe I'll request someone to help me. I've requested someone. Entire screen. No, why it's not coming? I'm seeing this screen, but this is part of the screen.
So just click on the screen and select the screen and select what you're seeing on the screen after you press your entire screen.
Just a minute. Sure, I'll just switch off the video for a minute, okay?
Sure,
and so that it's always this Murphy's law, which says things go wrong when they go wrong, you know. So I cancel this and I will switch off the video now, present now. Yes, yes. Are you able to see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
So you may please switch on your video also. We'll
Okay,
be able to
sure.
see you as well.
Sure. I'll switch on the video as well. Just 1 minute, I'm trying to switch on the video.
Sure, sir. No problem.
Change layout. Yeah, I believe now both are visible.
No, sir, we can't see you.
Is it better? No?
No, sir, it's just your icon. That's a photograph. We can't see you live.
1 second. Just again,
Yeah, see, sir, we can see you now.
you can see me?
Yes.
You can also see my presentation?
Yes, both, sir.
Okay. Both you are able to see.
Sir,
Okay,
before
fine.
you begin, it's just a reminder to all the participants that during sir's discourse, whatever questions they have in mind, they might please write it down in the chat box. Thank you, sir, and please, sir, you may address the audience now.
Thank you very much for this invite and rather generous introduction. Thanks, Professor Arundhati Majumdar, Professor Paramita Chakrabarti, and Professor Shoshpo Chakraborty, who had innumerable times called me for this thing. So I'm sure he is relieved now that I've actually virtually arrived today. Thank you very much for this invite. What I'm going to do is share my confusion with you collectively about the COVID-19 and the policy conundrum, primarily to do with monetary and fiscal policy. And as I say, I mean, I was mildly amused when Professor Chakraborty used the word enlightened. I have I'm not here to enlighten you. That's why I said to begin with, I perhaps will share my confusion. To me, it looks like the following. It's like, what is a conundrum? The typical dictionary meaning is a problem that is difficult to deal with. In a lighter vein, people often refer to, in economics literature at least, they say black hole conundrum, saying that I understand that people are attracted to black holes, but I don't know how they see anything there. But more seriously, it reminds me of the former US Donald Rumsfeld, what he said, that essentially there are three kinds of things. One is things that you know. I mean, we obviously know the sun will rise tomorrow morning, whether you're able to see for a cloudy sky or not. And there are known unknowns. You do not exactly know how the celebration of Durga Puja is going to happen. These are known knowns and known unknowns, but there's a third variety which says unknown unknowns completely. We do not know whether there will be a second wave of the current pandemic coming in. So I'm in a slippery slope of unknown unknowns, and therefore I see that I'm sharing my collective confusion. In management literature, this kind of situation often is referred to as VUCA. And that's an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This is a classic case. The current conundrum that we are in is a classic case of VUCA. The world is volatile, it's uncertain, no doubt. It is also complex because you do one thing, you press one lever and the other lever goes up. We'll see it shortly. Of course, this is complex and this is ambiguous. Often you do not know what I'm going to talk about. It is in this situation that I'm going to talk on the pandemic. First, I'll have it a very beginner's guide of pandemic. We know it all. Just for the sake of completeness, I thought I'll put that on the table to begin with. This data that I'm going to show you right now is today morning's data from Johns Hopkins website. As Professor Chakraborty in her introduction said it rightly, the number of global cases is something like 32 million. United States, 7 million. India has a dubious distinction of coming next to that, 5.8 million. Brazil, slightly below 4 million, etc. These numbers are important and they are also reflected in the number of deaths. But, we need to see the data at the same time with some grain of salt. We need to see the data the way they are, because as Ronald Coase, the Nobel laureate economist, reminded us long back, if you torture the data enough, they will confess. So I'm not going to torture the data enough. What I'm going to do is have a friendly conversation with the data and see what they are going to whisper to our ears. Moving further, if you look at the spread of the COVID across the major countries, yes, there's a dubious date of September the 7th. India is a gray line and the dashed line is Brazil. India has crossed Brazil and United States is top up and Russia is this dotted line. And lo and behold, the gray dashed line is China. So China has been able to control their pandemic even if you are skeptic about Chinese data. Despite your skepticism of Chinese data, these shows China is down below, whereas all other countries up there, we have the dubious distinction of being the second. Okay, this is deaths. Fortunately, number of deaths, India lags behind Brazil. Brazil is much ahead, and we will see shortly, we'll try to analyze why that be so. So the higher number of cases does not necessarily translate into higher number of deaths. Okay, in this context, let's talk of, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm a macroeconomist, cum policy economist. So in this world, we are bothered about why there should be there any economic impact on this. And I'm just randomly presented some earlier major epidemic, and looking at these numbers, if you look at the famous flu epidemic of 1918, the Spanish flu, this is like 20 to 50 million number. We do not know the exact number. This is going to be our current epidemic, the current pandemic of the COVID-19 is going to be of that intensity, of that spread. Also, please remember, this is the first global health crisis. I emphasize the word global because remember, so the earlier things like when you had things like plague, how got plague got spread? Basically, people moved from point A to port B through ship, and if they're affected, and if those people move into those cities, the people are affected there as well. But here, they're not moving by ship and not going to a seaport, but they are moving by airplanes and they are moving through. The world is much global, travel is much larger, therefore they are being affected in some way globally. It also has another implication. It perhaps, it shakes our faith on the modern medical science. We almost became an infallible faith. You knew things go wrong, but we didn't expect a new pandemic is going to come up. Despite the fact, in 2011, very, very profoundly, WHO made a statement saying that if a new pandemic comes in, we do not know how to handle it. That was 2011, 9 years back. So we had to pay the price for being negligent of those medical sciences, of those health facilities. Because the health facilities also has a business model, and the business model goes there, what has the highest patenting rights, etc. Within this context, what's the basic way in which it works? Look at the determinant of the impact, and there is real tension between lives and livelihood. So if you look at, you're able to see the screen, I hope. If you look at the ultimate impact, there is an economic impact and spread of a pandemic, and they're related. On what does economic impact depend upon? Lockdown. So the within bracket minus means the impact, the relationship between lockdown and economic impact is minus. The more severe is the lockdown, more severe will be this thing. So if it goes up, that will go down in that sense. Then there are long-term impact of fiscal stimulus. If the government spends more, governments are not magicians who can create rabbit out of a hat. So if they spend more, somebody has to pay for it. And the guys who pay for it is people like you and me. Either we pay for the taxes, or if we do not pay for the taxes, we buy government paper, government treasury bill. So either way, either through the tax route or through the borrowing route, we are going to say this. And please understand, in a lockdown, your economic policies may act as a healer, but at the same time, your freedom, livelihood is hugely adversely affected. And we all know the story of the migrant laborers in India after a sudden lockdown. But then what determines the spread of the pandemic, apart from lockdown and all? Of course, availability of quality of medical services, how better and how much medical services are available, number one. Number two, health status and hygiene habits, whether people inherently, genetically, they are better. For example, now medical research have shown that an African is less likely to be affected by a heart attack than an Asian, because the Asian have much more narrow arteries and veins. This is biologically, genetically, they are. Somebody could be less susceptible to this. And then finally, you have demographic factors, young and old. A young guy is less likely to be affected. An old guy with comorbidities are more likely to be affected. So please try to understand these factors, these 5 factors: lockdown, fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus, medical services, health status and hygiene habits, and demographic factors all interact with each other, very complex non-linear way, and they finally give you the outcome. So it's, for example, look at it. In Japan is hugely old population, but the Japan incidence of the current crisis is much lower, because essentially, remember, Japanese have better health status and better hygiene habits. India and Brazil, there has been a difference in death. One of the factors now experts says that perhaps since India is more young, therefore it's likely that there will be the number of deaths will be less in India than in Brazil perhaps. So these factors play around quite complexly among each other. Before I move further, I just wanted to show you one reality check. We have been arrogant enough to think of that we have got our legitimate place in the world and we should be proud of that. But at the same time, look at it, where exactly do we place ourselves into health metrics? So number of physicians per 10,000 people. In India, this is 7.8. In OECD countries, that is the developed world, which is OECD is a rich man's club in Paris. Full form is Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So they are 4 times 29. Our nurses and midwives per 10,000 people is 21. OECD, it's 80. Hospital beds is 7 per 10,000 people. OECD countries, it is 50. And current health expenditure is 3.7% of GDP. OECD countries is 12.6. Now, make no mistake, I'm not saying just because a country spends high medical expenditure does not mean the medical facility of the country is markedly better. This is not a proportional relationship. But what happens really, think of a country like United States, which does not have the best of medical care across the developed world, because a huge number of insurance companies are involved. Medical insurance makes itself the health hazards, the cost of health treatment much more expensive. So a higher is better, but with some footnotes. Moving further, how were the channels of transmission of economic loss? Because I'm now being heartless. I've moved from the loss of human lives. Any loss of human lives anywhere is very bad. It's like you're reminded of John Donne's For Whom the Bell Tolls. But remember that end of it, we are here more dispassionately in terms of economic loss. To the first, to begin with, this is loss of human lives. Then there are, of course, associated health costs, burden on exchequer. If you have a hospital, somebody has to pay for that hospital. If you as a poor person won't pay, then the state has to pay, and state has to manage their own finances. So there's a burden on exchequer. Of course, lockdown leads to stoppage of production in various sectors. The supply could go down and global supply chain is affected, and you know the hard way. The global supply chain was hugely affected. Then, if you have low income, then obviously you have low demand. Those who work in the consumer industry or are aware of the consumer industry, all the sale of the consumer durables, normal white goods have come down hugely because people don't have money to buy. Corporates are hit adversely. Of course, again, with a footnote, some of the corporates, because somebody who is working on a particular medicine which can act as a deterrent to the pandemic, that company might see something going high. Logistic companies, which are not necessarily physical logistics, they might see high. A company like, think of Microsoft, whose platform we are using. I mean, maybe a year back, we are not using webinar to this extent. Their demand has gone up. A company like Zoom, their share prices really has zoomed. And then initially there was a gray, gloomy mood in the financial sector, financial market. Banking sector also was hit adversely, and huge burden on the monetary authorities or the central bank. So this is a laundry list summarizing the various ways in which you can have channels of transmission of economic loss. Now from here, let me now come to the meat of my talk today. This is, we are going to look at the policy conundrum in global economy and then in Indian economy. So that's the plate, that's a plate menu that you're going to have today. At first, the policy conundrum in the global economy, and then policy conundrum in the Indian economy. Let me start with a brief digression of what economic policy is all about, and what it is and what it is not. Now, I draw your attention, and I mean, I understand economists have almost an obsessive love for charts and diagrams, but this is the only chart I'm going to show in the abstract sense. So if you look at time in the horizontal axis and output in the vertical axis, there is a black line. The black line is really the trend growth. And then there's an actual line. Actual line is basically the GDP path, the path of the gross domestic product that you are seeing. Now, there are two kinds of policies. One is, policy number one, they move from a recession to a peak. So if we can move the economy from the red ones to the blue ones, that's great. That's called basically macroeconomic policies, by which we mean fiscal or monetary policy. But then we also want to shift this black line, the potential curve, up or down. So there comes the structural policies. So what are the structural policies? Structural policies like infrastructure, public institutions, quality of rule of law, whether the country is more corrupt or less corrupt, or publicity enterprise, social sector expenditure, so on and so forth. Now, please do remember this distinction, because moving forward, basic distinction is macro policies work in the short run, but not in the long run. Whereas structural policies takes time. I mean, today, if you want to solve a problem just by building a bridge, it takes time to build a bridge. You can start definitely. So this is a short run, this is a long run. And in a crisis, we are concerned with short run. We want to tide over the crisis. If today somebody tells you, let's discuss your career path after 10 years, and you might say, I might not get a job after I pass out. So therefore, please do remember, as Lord John Maynard Keynes reminded us long back, that in the long run, we're all dead. So we are concerned with both the short run as well as the long run moving further. But the primary emphasis is the short run. That's what the economic policy space is all about. So please do remember, the policymakers are not magicians capable of pulling a rabbit out of a hat. That there lies the crux of the phenomenon of conundrum. The reason being, there are trade-offs in the policy. Now today, suppose we are all, you, me, and your teachers, all are in the education sector. Suppose we go and do a delegation to the education minister and finally to the finance minister and say, government should spend more on education. Audible proposition. Education minister is very happy. The finance minister asks you a nasty question. She asks you, tell me, where from do I get the money? Where from do I get the money? So there are two ways. You might say, hey, we don't need defense. Forget defense and move some money from defense to education. That could be deadly, because you know there are issues in our borders. So somebody says, okay, we need defense, but let's forget the entertainment industry. Government should not spend at all on films. Again, you have a dilemma. So the dilemma is between where to spend, or then government asks you, okay, let me increase the tax. Then all of us have very elongated face because we want to have higher incremental education, but you do not want to pay for it. That's that, and economics is that way. Reminds us, Milton Friedman reminded us long back, there is no free lunch. Somebody must be paying for it. If it is free for you, somebody must be paying for it. So basically the fiscal policy, the trade-offs are this crowding out meaning if government spends more means government borrows more, then private sector is unable to borrow, so then private sector is upset if rate of interest goes up. And then remember, government has a budget constraint. Budget constraint is today's expenditure plus the interest payment on all past expenditure must be equal to total revenue plus total borrowing. So that's what, when you and me want the finance minister to increase total expenditure is here, then obviously she will ask you, where do I get it? So first, if you have tax more, then all of us are upset. Or say borrow more. If you borrow more, next year interest payment is going to go up. So there lies the conundrum, the crux of the conundrum in the fiscal space. In the monetary policies, the conundrum is much more. What? First trade-off is between growth and inflation. So at this juncture, you meet Mr. Satyakanta Das in a shopping mall, maybe. I mean, both of you happen to go there, and you ask him, why don't you decrease the repo rate further? Make it, say, 2%. He said, very fine. Have you looked at the inflation number? Inflation, if it is 6%, and the inflation goes up to 8%, I'm going to lose my job, and the poor people of India is unable to have their meal. So there is a negative trade-off between growth and inflation. The Reserve Bank of India reduces the repo rate, gives a fillip to the growth, that is going to affect the inflation. That is very, very difficult. but then more between, also between open and closed economy. So when he reduces the interest rate more, then as a place for capital, India loses its attractiveness. So your cousins from United States, they're going to withdraw money from India. If they withdraw money from India, I'm telling you a lullaby story. If they withdraw money from India, what happens? India's rupee is going to depreciate. So rupee today, tomorrow might turn out to be, say, 100. If rupee turns out to be 100 from, say, 76 or 75 to 100, then your oil bill is going to be huge and the country may face towards a bankruptcy. In other words, this policy space is quite complex. You cannot do one without the other. Added to this, there are political economic considerations which I have not discussed so far. There are people, pressure groups, one group is happy, other group is unhappy. And essentially remember, the art of politics is one of balancing. So with this backdrop, let us now discuss. My task is simple. I will discuss the global economy and then I'll move to the Indian economy. I can go up to 5:30, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Right. So I have switched things around 45 minutes. That's right. Even I might finish it. So let's look at the global economy first. Now let me describe the global economy a little bit, because I'm sure you're aware of this. Is just to harp on the same thing that you and me becomes on the same page. First, the world has roughly around 190, 189 countries who are members of IMF and World Bank. They are the major block of countries which are involved in international transaction. This chart does not include, say, two countries which you have heard of. One is North Korea, second is Cuba. Now, they're not included, not because they're unimportant, but their share of GDP is very low anyway in the world. And second is they're not part of the global blocks. In this, there are 39 advanced countries. Now, who have determined these 39 advanced countries? There's no agency per se. This is, you laugh at me if I say these are hostages of history. A country is an advanced country. Of course, they will have a higher per capita income, but more importantly, because that country is part of a bloc. For example, Greece is an advanced country despite years of huge economic crisis, because Greece is part of EU and Euro area. But China is not an advanced country. Please understand, China is an emerging country. Of course, Chinese per capita GDP will be lower than the per capita GDP of Greek people. So that's there, but there's no magic number of this. Now, if you look at this table, you'll realize there's a tectonic shift in the global economic power over the last 30 years or so. Since 1990s, early 1990s, I mean, to me, the starting point of globalization, in some way, the date of fall of Berlin Wall. When Berlin Wall failed, essentially when we were young and were students like you guys, we were taught there are three worlds: first world, second world, third world. First world, the capitalist countries, advanced capitalist countries. Second world is a socialist bloc, and third world is countries like us. That distinction got dulled. So from 1991, if you look at the advanced countries' share in global GDP at PPP, which is a short form of purchasing power parity, so that we can compare apples and oranges, because after all, the cost of living in Calcutta is not same as cost of living in India, a cost of living in say Delhi or in New York. So therefore, we adjust for those things. Okay, the advanced countries' share have come down from 64% to 40%. That's a major 25, almost it's like how many? Sorry, it's like almost 15% drop. Huge drop. So 40 to 50, 50 to 60, yes, 25% point drop. And par contra, therefore, the share of the emerging and developing economies, and who are they? They're residual. So the world minus the 39 advanced countries are all emerging markets. So in emerging markets, their share went up from 36 to 59. And who among these in this block of emerging markets and developing economies? The block called emerging and developing Asia. We don't realize, because we are part of that life history, that our share, the Asian countries' share, went up from 12 to almost like 32, 34, which is almost like trebled. In a 30-year period, your share has trebled. What happened in Asia? And please understand, this is emerging and developing Asia, which is basically Asia minus few advanced countries within Asia like Japan or Korea. What happened here? First, in 1970s, the whole group of East Asian countries emerged. And who are these? These are like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, all these countries emerged. And before that, Korea and others. They had a crisis in 1999, but they shoot back. They hit back and they came up. That's 70s. Then in 80s, China emerged because Chairman Mao passed away, and Deng Xiaoping, when he became the premier, he made that famous statement, black cat, white cat, what does it matter the color of the cat as long as it catches mice? In other words, here we found a very pragmatic politician from a communist country who said, I don't care for the color of the capital. So I will have capitalist development, but perhaps in a non-democratic structure. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm saying these are major events. And then in India, we started liberalizing from 1991. So these three events occurred, and therefore this 12% has 12.6% became 34. So that's remember. This might give you a false sense of arrogance that, hey, now we have appeared in the global stage and we can do what we like. This is far from it. And next chart will tell you, will add some humility to you. This chart points out the global growth between 2000 to 2019. I'm stopping at 19. I will come to the 20th, the year of 2020 shortly to explain the impact of the pandemic. But here I'm telling you the broad story. In terms of broad story, clearly you know 2009 was the year of crisis. The global economy growth rate was 0. The advanced countries' growth rate was -4. So who pulled the growth rate of global economy? The emerging markets and developing countries, and in particular emerging and developing Asia, which you have seen that emerging and developing Asia has arrived in the market. But remember one important thing, it does not give you a sense of isolation. It captures the globalization story and tells you we move up together and we come down together. This is the phenomenon of the great coupling. So the world is a global village. We move up together, we come down together. There may be difference in growth rate, but difference in growth rate could be difference in basis. Because remember, growth rate is a function of the initial value. Remember, one of you got 10 out of 100 last year in a subject, and this year got 20 out of 20. So which means your improvement is absolutely 100%. But still in both the years, you have flunked. Whereas somebody else got 99 last year and 90 last year, and this year got 99, the increase is only 10%. So just by looking at the growth, you cannot say the impact is that much, because growth is always calculated over a base, and if the base is low, naturally growth rate tend to be hugely glorious. So this chart tells you basically two things. Emerging and developing Asia developed huge power that pulled the growth rate over the world, but they're not in isolation. They're part of a grand coupling phenomenon that's happening in the global economy. Moving further, the economic impact of this pandemic will be captured through two streets. For better segregation typology, we will say this is a Main Street and the Wall Street. Wall Street, it's not necessarily I'm referring to the New York Wall Street, I'm referring to the phenomenon of the financial markets, and Main Street as all non-financial markets. This is very important moving forward. Now we have seen this chart till 2019. I will extend this chart with the forecast of 2020 numbers. And then you will perhaps have a gloomy mood, because look at the 2020 numbers. If you look at the last stretch, please do realize this is much more lower than the last crisis we had, 2009 crisis. Everywhere, all countries are expected to, all groups of countries are expected to be down and under. I will just move one more on this phenomenon before I move further. If you look at the latest World Economic Outlook growth projection of joint projection of IMF and World Bank, I will draw your attention to the third column, which is a 2020, the third column. First column is world output, then is 2019, then 2020. If you just cursorily look at 2020, all these numbers are negative excepting one. Name the country which is one. Except the country which is positive. Name that country. China. Very interesting. So now you realize the country from which the origin of this particular phenomenon have, through initial measures, through very draconian lockdown, whatever be the methods, even if you're skeptic with Chinese data, they have solved the problem. That's the only country which is negative. All other countries in the world, only country that's positive, all other countries in the world are negative. Look at India. India is minus 4.5. Some of the countries like Spain, minus 12.8. I don't know when was the last time Spanish economy contracted by that percentage. Euro area minus 10.2. United States minus 8. And some of them, Mexico is minus 10.5. Awful numbers. So the whole world is suffering, and we too are. Now I will show you one contrast here. You have just seen that the growth numbers are very poor. Now here I'm just showing you, this is the only slide on the financial sector, just for different things that I wanted to show you. If you look at the movement in Wall Street, and I've just shown, I could have, I actually, when I talk to the financial sector, I look at all the different charts. But here I'm just looking at two charts. One is Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is essentially the New York Stock Exchange, and the other is first you realize that if had I not told you, you might not know which is what. But both these two charts show there's a steep fall in the share prices all over the world. This is New York, this is Mumbai. But then from April, they started moving up. What happened in April? Did you invent a new vaccine? Did the extent of pandemic started going down? On the contrary, they went up. There was no vaccine. So there must be something here playing around. And that playing around is nothing but your monetary and fiscal stimulus. Huge amount of money has been pumped into the economy, and therefore you had this. Now, which sectors are affected? Because that will give you a sense of where exactly you are. So in terms of pure sectors, if you look at it, the most affected sector are airlines, trade, hotels, and leisure, then entertainment. These three sectors, which physically means going out, they have been hugely affected. But there is a side story as well, subtext as well. The subtext being The entertainment industry, when it comes to going to multiplexes, have stopped. But at the same time, please do remember the online viewership has gone up hugely. I'm aware of this. Netflix has been hugely increasing. All the standard platforms that you have in the urban areas have hugely been increasing. And in this situation, why this has happened? It happened because of the global policy package. And we'll come to India in a minute, within the next 5 minutes, and we'll see that like the global policy package, India also followed the similar bandwagon, maybe less. How much is the global policy package? This chart is from a report by McKinsey, which they published the day before yesterday. You're seeing two circles. One circle is the turquoise blue, the other is dark blue. The turquoise blue circle represents, the bigger one represents the extent of stimulus at the current juncture. And the smaller one is extent of stimulus in 2008 crisis. You see, in all countries, we have had much more fiscal monetary stimulus than what was earlier. But please understand, this is the total economic stimulus and not just the fiscal stimulus. Why? Because remember, fiscal stimulus is government giving money to you, they're spending on something. Monetary stimulus is cut off the repo rate that is being done by Mr. Satyakanta Das in RBI. And in between, we also have something like credit guarantee. We'll see later. Okay, and thus far, the basic stimulus measures globally has 3 primary objectives. First is maintain financial stability. We don't want at this juncture another headache to come in, a bank going bust, that's bad news. We want to maintain households' economic welfare, and therefore we want to directly give money to them. And third, we can help companies to survive the crisis. Various things have been happening in various countries. I'm not going to this, but I'm just telling you, if you look at the pure fiscal stimulus means what is done by the government alone, and not with RBI, not with any other things. India's fiscal stimulus has been one of the lowest. On the lower side, this was some time back, 1.1. The latest number will be much higher, but around 2.8. So the 10% that you hear is 10% sum of all those apples, oranges, and pineapples. We'll come to what are those apples, oranges, pineapples, but actual Indian fiscal spending has been much less. Okay, one implication for this is all over the world, fiscal deficit going up. I use the word fiscal balance. Fiscal balance means if it is positive, then you call it surplus. If it is negative, you call it deficit. Now look at 2020. All these numbers are hugely deficit. And look at the change from 2019 to 2020. You will understand the extent of fiscal stimulus that has gone there. This is fiscal balance, which is a flow, which is incremental during the year. But if you look at the stock of debt, you get a horrendous number. The world as a whole, the debt GDP ratio now exceeds 100, is 101.5. So the government's total indebtedness is very high. This is, government can't get the money from moon. Okay, so government has got the money from you, me, and the corporates. This is the only thing. Also, occasionally, government borrows from overseas market. So you, domestic you, then corporate, domestic, and then overseas market. That's how you borrow. So the debt is huge, and lo and behold, for a country like Japan, the debt number is 268% of GDP. But Japan must be heading for a huge crisis then. It did not have because Japan has a convertible currency. The yen is convertible and therefore they can borrow more. It's like this. It's like, think of this, between you and Mr. Ambani, I'm sure you will appreciate that Mr. Ambani's indebtedness will be much more because his economic muscle power is much more. So obviously, if you have more capability to spend, you can afford to take a higher debt. If you do not have that capability, we do not have debt. And India's number is 84% is fine. I'm not bothered. I would have been happier if it is 70%, but I'm not happier 84% as well. So far, we have been under control. We have been doing a conservative thing, but there are certain issues that I'll flag later for India. So what they have done, the central bank policies, they've done various things. Now, I'm sure this particular slide, we can talk for 1.5 hours, but I'll give you a sense what they have done. They have put the central bank rates, like our repo rate, is towards zero. When they are near zero, in some countries, they have also put the interest rate negative. Now, what does negative interest rate mean? It does not mean if you borrow money from a bank, tomorrow you are going to pay less, not for you. But basically, the central bank wants to discourage commercial banks to park their additional fund with them. So how can they discourage? They discourage saying that if you keep money with us, you are getting less tomorrow. This is like many of you may have or may have heard at least of safe deposit locker. What is a safe deposit locker? You go there, put something and give a service charge. So negative interest rate is like a service charge of the money that a commercial bank keeps with the central bank. Then the government buys various kinds of bonds. They are supposed to buy government bond, the central banks, but they bought corporate bonds, they bought commercial paper, they bought those toxic asset-backed securities of 2008 and 9. They wanted to control the yield curve at a higher maturity, and they are, say, giving forward guidance. So all things together, it had it. Now, I have told you the central bank injected money. How much money they have injected? You might not have got that thing. So I'll just show you the money injected by the US Fed. Now, this will give you a sense of how much money has been injected. In 2019, the US federal balance sheet size was around 3.6 trillion with a T. This is December end 2019. And August end 2020, it is something like 6.6. So within the last 8 months, United States have printed 2.9 trillion US dollar and pumped in the economy. Remember, just the broad numbers, the broad sense, 8 months and 2.9 trillion. That's how you get the stock market in US booming. Some of those money are coming here via the foreign portfolio investor, foreign institutional investors. Therefore, our yield curve and our stock market is also booming same time. But that has not led to inflation in the United States, because in the United States, the problem is lack of demand. So despite pumping of this money is not there. And please do remember, not that all this 2.9 trillion US dollar is in US. The other countries also buying it, because remember, United States is a completely convertible currency. So US Treasury bill are being held by number of countries. The first of them is Japan, second is China, and third is UK. So these countries buy huge amount of US bonds, including India. India's, whatever the forex reserves that we have, essentially kept in terms of US bonds. So therefore, the policy dilemma in this case here, they have pumped huge liquidity. Central bank cannot go bankrupt technically. Technically, they cannot go bankrupt. Countries cannot go bankrupt technically, because what do? In bad old days, you might, if a country goes bankrupt, you might send your troop. But in this case, you cannot do it. Okay. Shivashish, I'll take the questions later. Maybe once I finish it. Okay. I'll come to India now. Okay, so this completes my discussion on the global economy. Let me come to Indian economy now. Okay. Let me come to the policy conundrum in Indian economy. Please do appreciate that Indian economy, even if, suppose you would have called me for this talk, but COVID has not happened. So, Professor Shashmo Chakraborty, suppose, would have called me to give a talk in early March. So we have only heard about COVID, we have not seen much. Even then, please appreciate that we would have seen Indian economy, there is reduction in growth rate over the last 3 years. Now, at this juncture, I'll give you a very broad picture of Indian economy so that you understand what's happening. These 3 years, 2005, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, were the brilliant most years of the Indian economy. This was end of UPA 1. Then came the crisis, and around the crisis came huge fiscal and monetary stimulus. Immediately growth rate picked up, 7.9, 8.5. Okay, very good. But the moment these are withdrawn, last 2 years of UPA 2 is very bad numbers. Very bad numbers. And then NDA's initial 3 years growth rate was impressive. 7 though there are data issues, they moved to the new GDP statistics and there are data issues. Despite that, this 2014, 15, 15, 16, 17, 16, 17, impressive. But then comes so from 8.3, this becomes 7.0, this became 6.1, and this becomes 4.2. And there's no COVID here. This I'm stopping at March 2020. Which means even without COVID, the last 3 years of Indian economy has not been very impressive. And 4.2 is not the growth number for which you have been tom-tomming around the world. You have been saying we are 8% growth, we are 7% growth. So that 8%, 7% is 3 year, next 3 years, you are not seeing that kind of a growth rate any further. And if you look at the quarterly data, then lo and behold, it's like for last 8 to 9 quarters, there's a consistent deceleration. There is a consistent deceleration in these growth numbers. So in other words, what's the difference between earlier crisis and now? Earlier crisis in 2008-9, when it affected us, our 3 years was very impressive growth rate. Okay, and the global economy was also doing very well. So this was the crisis affected us when the going was good. But now, with 2021, when you're seeing the crisis, we are 3 years of a downfall in growth in India. And we have globally, we have Mr. Trump is doing what he's doing, and we have we have a US-China trade war, complete trade war there. So the world is much more malign now. World was benign earlier. Our old domestic situation is much more malign now. It was benign earlier. So therefore, you should realize when a crisis hits you, when you're weak, the impact of the crisis is likely to get exacerbated. Okay. And some of you, one of you, I think who, Shivashish was saying about stagflation. So she was profound here. If you look at the CPI inflation numbers, if this from January 19, we are roaming around now 7%, 6% plus at least. And those are matter of concern, because if you have this and this, I would say stagflation, because look at it. You can't say 4.2% as stagnation. That calls for our expectation. Stagnation is bad, 0% growth rate. 4% you can't exactly talk of that, but yes, in this particular year, when you have the first quarter very bad data, then you are facing a trouble. Yes, indeed. Now, therefore, what has happened in India? Pandemic indeed has led to a multi-layered crisis. It started with the health shock, yes. Then we have domestic economic disruption. There has been a reverse migration. And reverse migration is very, very expensive. Very expensive both for the host economy as well as for the destination economy, both. To give an illustration, you are aware of lots of West Bengal rural farmers regularly go to Kerala to act as agricultural laborers. Now, they have been affected by the pandemic. They came home. Now, when they come home, you expect their family members will say, even if you earn 1/2 of your earlier salary, please don't go back. Now, this don't go back is bad both from Kerala and for West Bengal. Appreciate that. And therefore, these are going to affect both these states' GDP as an illustration, and therefore all India GDP totally. So please do remember, reverse migration is very, very costly because there has been sudden and very, very draconian lockdown. That's very serious. And then you have complete halt of economic activity. If you think of those charts I have shown you, that almost like the whole entertainment, hospitality sector, they have come to a standstill. The civil aviation sector comes to a standstill. Thank God Indian Railways is owned by the government. Otherwise, Railways been a private company. Railway would have been applied for bankruptcy by this time. And there's a huge plummeting of external demand because whosoever was selling abroad are unable to sell the commodities. Yes, not everything. Some of them, for example, if somebody works in Bangalore as an outsourced market for someone in US of A, in this case, not necessarily he or she will be affected. But he or she will be affected much more if Mr. Trump does completely a turnaround and halts all kind of H-1B visas. And finally, I have warned you earlier, there could be capital flow reversal. So if there is a capital flow reversal, which means people withdraw their money from us, this negative on account of FII, also FDI in some cases, in that case, there will be pressure on rupee. There has not been pressure of rupee that much because of the Uncle Sam pumping huge amount of money, 2.9 trillion over the last 8 months. Therefore, in the world, liquidity is not necessarily a problem. In fact, I'll argue, even in India, liquidity is not exactly a problem in the sense the banks are parking huge amount of money to the reverse repo window. And they're not taking a loan from RBI on the repo window. Okay, so the economic stimulus in India. That's important. Economic stimulus, first the RBI. So RBI, this is monetary stimulus. Monetary stimulus in one word is cut in repo rate. Policy repo rate from February 19, they're cutting from 6.25% to 4% now. That's quite a huge cut. That's 225 basis points cut. Huge cut because, and all these are before pandemic, because if you see from pandemic, what they have done is essentially this 5.515 onwards. So this 1.15% cut is due to pandemic. Before that is all essentially due to the earlier plummeting of demand in India, which I have shown you the numbers that even without the pandemic, Indian economy have been, their growth rate have been plummeting. It came out from something like 8% to 4.3%. And how much money they have injected? But money they have injected is something like 9.57 lakh crore. Lakh crore is trillion, essentially 9 zeros, trillion. That's equivalent to 4.7% of nominal GDP. Huge amount of money. But what is the total economic stimulus package? And here you will understand what I've told you. This is monetary stimulus, the number one. This is monetary stimulus. And then that's around 4.7% of GDP. Pure fiscal stimulus, which is directly giving money to the people, we have 2.84%. And then if others. Others is essentially you have certain non-guarantee liquidity scheme, essentially emergency wage and means advance scheme, or this is purely some credit guarantee scheme. So these things really, this 3.5 is really a contingent liability that will come in force only if you default or you take those things. The basic difference between monetary and fiscal policy is in fiscal policy, you get the money directly. In monetary policy's case, you have to go to the bank to borrow money to get the benefit. Now, who among you are going to buy a newer major white goods at this point of time? If you do not buy, the banks will face a huge difficulty in terms of their loan portfolio. In other words, they'll be flowing with cash, but there's nobody to take a loan. Okay, and the guys who will take a loan, for them, you might be bothered that those loans, those chickens will come home to roost after 3 years, and they might give birth to huge amount of NPAs at that point of time. So this is the number I believe Professor Chakravarti referred in her initial address, that I have not seen this number in my lifetime. And I'm looking at these numbers for the last 40 years. This is 23.9%. India's GDP in a quarterly basis have come down. But please do not multiply this by 4 and divide by 4 and arrive at a number that this will be the total reduction in GDP over the year. Because this is the most crucial, cruel, grueling lockdown of April to June. Things have started moving from there. So I'm not expecting, but it's definitely going to be negative. And you have huge issue of non-performing assets. In 2019, it turned out to be 11%. So it started from 2003 from 8.8% non-performing assets. It is 11.2% last year. I mean, year before last year it became 9.3. It sort of indicated the RBI July report. RBI themselves are saying huge amount of money could go bad, and therefore the financial stability report they said that the pandemic-induced lockdown could be adverse. Okay, so I'm almost in the end. I'll have 1 or 2 more slides. First, I started with saying we are at unknown unknowns. So we do not enough to make predictions about the future. We do not know, for example, this is the menu of our ignorance. This is the time not to be arrogant about what we say, what we speak about. This is a time to show our humility and accept all fairness that we do not know enough how the near future is going to get shaped like. I have a fair idea of the slightly after 2 years or so, I have a fair idea things are going to be solved. But over the next 2 years, how they are going to be, that's what I'm fumbling about. The economic fallout depends on factors that are uncertain. These are contingent upon the following factor. What are the factors? Pathway of the pandemic. Is there going to be a second movement, second again wave? The intensity and efficacy of the containment effort, because there are countries, for example, we are very impressed with the illustration of Sweden at some point of time. They didn't have lockdown and expected complete herd immunity to come in. But I mean, complete herd immunity, I didn't see much support. The extent of supply disruption that has taken place, the whole repercussion of huge domestic tightening of financial condition initially and not now. And some of you said rightly that yes, this kind of a stock market irrational exuberance is due to the fiscal stimulus. There is shift in spending pattern. There are behavioral changes such as people avoiding shopping malls and public transportation. These behavioral changes are very, very expensive, those period. And you know, people have been laid off, they have been shown their pink slip, they have accepted a wage cut and things like that. There's been huge confidence effect, and the commodity prices also have been volatile. So I was asked to recapitulate. Pandemic led to a multi-layered crisis. It was a health shock, a domestic economic disruption, external demand plummeted, the capital flows got reversed, what the money coming in, now money no longer is coming in. And I'll take the questions, Boishaki and others, Dipandita, I'll take the questions later. And collapse of the commodity prices, impact on the financial sector. The risks of worse outcome. I was asked to talk about the policy conundrums. So let me sum up the policy conundrum. First, health expenditure. How much can the state take care? You recall yourself, when was the last time you went to a government hospital unless you have your close relation working there? How many is that percentage, people? I don't think that percentage might not exceed 10%. And there's a high probability from a college of yours, it might turn out to be, something like 5%, unless you have some close ones who are working there. So that's like, you're a referral. So how much health expenditure? Because please do remember, in health expenditure, there are different models in the world. First, you have a model like Scandinavia, very high tax rate, but all health expenditure is taken care by the state. It's very good. And you have something like United States, medium tax rate, but the state don't care unless you're abysmally poor. The whole thing is the mercy of health insurance companies. And then you have Indian case in health expenditure where you have thrown the baby with the bathwater, where you have hugely expensive private health care. You have certain insurance, but the insurance penetration, health insurance penetration is low. I understand last year the Prime Minister has announced something, last budget announced something. That's great, but even then health penetration is low. Next, you have absolutely the public sector health facility where the poor will go, where there may be skill set may be there. There may be good doctors, but there are issues related to hygiene, there are issues related to other facilities. And then how to finance it? So who will finance it? Remember one thing, as a nation, we do not pay taxes. The number of, if you are born in Norway, the number of people who are voters divided by number of people who are taxpayers, this number for Norway is 100. So 100 voters, all of them pay taxpayers. In this context, this number for India is 7. So out of 100 taxpayers in India, out of 100 voters, 7 only are the taxpayers. So as a nation, we do not pay enough taxes. Please do remember. How much debt? So government borrow, is it sustainable? You have already seen 84%. Can they go further? Can they go to 85, 86, 87? Because if you borrow more, if the market conditions is tight, you have to pay higher interest rate. Should we, another conundrum, should we introduce a universal basic income? No questions asked. Just because you are a human being born in India, you will be getting 2,500 rupees in your bank account every month. Should it be? Can we afford that? Who will pay for it? Should we transfer the money directly to the account of people, or we should buy things and distribute it indifferently? For example, should we completely get rid of the public distribution system, the rationing shops, and give money direct to the people, let them buy from the market? And then, is a budget deficit in our country is underestimated. There are organizations, rating agencies, which have indicated there may be element of underestimation in our budget deficit. In monetary policy, how much can the RBI governor go on reducing repo rate? He has put from 6.25 to 4. How bad he can do? Can he make it 2? And all the more, he is torn between the devil of inflation and deep sea of all possible recession. So is it then any interest reduction in interest rate makes you happy or unhappy depends on what's your age group. If you're a senior citizen who survive with interest income on fixed deposits, then you are really bothered. You're really bothered that your interest income is going down. You're very upset why the hell RBI government is doing it. On the contrary, if you are a small manufacturer, where any rise in interest cost may kill your business. So it depends where you are. This is a genuine conundrum, how much to reduce and how much not to reduce. Finally, is there any concern for the capital flows and exchange rate? Capital flows and exchange rate are extremely important, but more important here, another group of your cousins play a hugely difficult role, the role of rating agencies. Rating agencies look at it, and then when the rating agencies look at it, they look at the fiscal deficit going high, RBI governor reducing the interest rate even when the inflation is going high. If they reduce interest rating, immediately at that point of time, there will be capital outflow. And when capital outflows, we are a current account deficit country. We do not export enough. In terms of goods, we're a huge current account importer, current account deficit. Because of IT and remittances, our current account deficit is controllable. The trade deficit is controlled through a manageable current account deficit. That current account deficit, the money is financed by capital flows. So if tomorrow there is now lack of money on account of that, there are serious issues of how to finance our current account deficit. There will be pressure on exchange rate. Exchange rate may depreciate further. What is you are seeing anything between 74 to 77 might go to 80 and 90 tomorrow. That has huge implication on our oil bill. In other words, this is not a very happy situation for any policymakers. They are bound by these conundrums. And as you understand, anywhere, policymakers have to make these balancing acts. Only in the near future, in near or not so near future, we'll come to know how have we handled this crisis, whether we have handled with grace or we have messed it up. But as long as things stand now, we are in somewhat gray areas and we are unable to forecast the future with complete certainty. In fact, one is reminded of Woody Allen, the filmmaker, who said forecasting is difficult, particularly for the future. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop here. If there's a Q&A, how do you handle it? I'm available. Should I close this thing with my...
Yes, sir. You may stop the screen sharing.
Okay.
Thank you so very much, sir, for that discourse. Of course, your lucid discourse has actually had the data confess by all means. As veritably stated, this certainly is a multi-layered crisis leading to an economic slowdown with shift in behavioral patterns. Thank you for that enriching deliberation. And once again, to quote unquote, thank you for sharing your confusion with us, but definitely in the process, you have enlightened all of us. From here, we will move on to the interactive session that will be conducted by Dr. Urvi Mukherjee and Professor Shayan Roy.
Okay. How do I access the chat window?
Sir, the question will be told to you.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
Okay, fine. Wonderful. That's fine.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
It was really a very enlightening and insightful session. We all are enriched and enlightened, and we have got a number of questions. You have already gone through the chat box, so I shall ask you one by one, and after a few questions, I will pass on it to Professor Shayan Roy. So first question has come from one of our faculty members, Dr. Duti Sinha. She has asked that, sir, given the Indian economy is largely constituted of a massive unorganized sector, monetary policy measures have become nearly ineffective. Is it right?
Yes and no. Let me say, monetary policy, look, in an unorganized sector, you do not go to a bank directly.
Right.
But you do not take a loan directly. But remember, you are employed somewhere. You are employed somewhere and that guy might go there. For example, think of it. An auto rickshaw driver is an unorganized sector, but he cannot buy that auto rickshaw driver himself. Essentially, he has to go to a bank to take a loan. Now, he may be a better example, but absolutely say a plumber or a carpenter. Complete unorganized sector, plumber or a carpenter works for the construction sector, maybe when big buildings coming up. So if there is a lull in the construction activity like this, then the plumber or that carpenter will suffer. So when the construction activity booms, the plumber or the carpenter will be booming as well. So it's the monetary policy, the beauty or lack of it, it depends not on a direct thing, it is an indirect thing. So the unorganized sector may not take the money directly, but they might take indirectly get the benefit because their employer might take that. Okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. I have a question that we have seen that in order to cope up with the ongoing pandemic, our government has taken a number of policy measures. I will especially focus on the fiscal policy measures taken by Indian government. Sir, how far is this successful? Will it be really helpful to boost up the economy? First of all, I will ask about the coping of situation. So will it be really helpful? How far it is successful?
Too early to comment. I'll tell you bluntly and honestly, my personal expectation was they could be spending more. And my personal expectation is another bout of fiscal stimulus may be coming.
Right.
This is my personal hunch. I'm not sure. I'm not part of the government. But will it be successful? This is, you always have to do incrementally. You have a baby step to go to the destination. 4 steps will be successful to go to the destination. I do not know. This is like, toddler moving the baby steps. So in this uncertain world. So I mean, and there you realize the famous joke of Alan Greenspan was, what's tomorrow if you somebody asks you? So, 1, 2, 3, what next? So somebody said, 4, that's the arithmetic way you do. He said, not so fast, it should be 3 because yesterday is the best predictor of today. And 1, 2, 3, what next? Somebody said 3 and Greenspan said, not so fast, it should be 2 because everything should have a mean reverting tendency. And then somebody says 1, 2, 3, what next? 2, he said, not so fast, it should be 1 because what moves up might come down. So depending upon the philosophy of the forecaster, the next number to 1, 2, 3 could be 4, 3, 2, or 1. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you. I can understand. So, third question is from Professor Shayan Roy. What should be the role of public as well as private financial institution to boost the economy in a wider sense?
By institution, you mean financial institution? Sorry, I'm asking.
Financial, yes, sir. Financial institution. Financial, private and yes.
Give a loan where you are relatively sanguine that money is a genuine project. But otherwise, do not give indiscriminate loan because now we have the experience of 2008 crisis. You have given this indiscriminate loan in the name of the public-private partnership, and all those chickens have come home to roost as NPA. So in other words, be generous, but be careful. It's about what, Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Okay, so they should give more loan, but they should not give indiscriminate loan. They should be checking the due diligence as well. But they should be generous. Interest cost should be lower. They should pass on whatever RBI is passing on.
Okay. Okay. Another question is from Professor Devdeep Mall. Amid this pandemic, the introduction of Farmer Bill is another shock. Sir, how do you perceive it?
Let me say this way. I partially agree with this view. I would have been expecting this to come little later. This is despite the fact, per se, in principle, I may not be against it, but it might be a wrong time to have it. Because I'll tell you why. Indian agriculture has become nobody's baby. The public sector has abandoned it, and the private sector has not taken it. How many companies are active in the agricultural space? So it's like it has become nobody's baby. There are no takers, and government simply at this juncture does not have enough money to afford it. So in general, I see there are elements of good intention, but yes, I agree with Professor Mal that I'm not aware. I'm not very sure whether it's the right time to push forward that.
Okay, sir. So rest of the questions will be asked by Professor Shayan Roy. Shayanda, over to you.
Thank you, Duti. First of all, thank you, sir, for your outstanding deliberation. Now, I am moving into the next question. The next question asked again by Dr. Duti Sinha. During this pandemic, the huge financial stimulus has boosted the stock market with positive expectations. But this stimulus was meant for ordinary people to keep their purchasing power unchanged in order to maintain the domestic demand. So can we say that the policy stimulus was pro-rich?
Very good question. Outstanding question, I must say. I wouldn't say pro-rich. I would say the policy stimulus has been hijacked by the rich. So I would say this, and this always happens. Whenever any policy stimulus happens, you understand the basics of Keynesian macroeconomics says that it should go to the people who are ready to spend. The people who have high marginal propensity to consume, they are ready to spend and they can spend there. So if it goes to the rich and mighty, they're not going to spend, they're going to save the money. And if savings increases at this juncture, that's bad. That's bad in this time of pandemic. In this pandemic, people should be coming to the streets. I mean, not to physically, but coming to buy things. So if this is transferred to the rich and it boosts the stock market, that could be difficult. And there are views at this juncture, people who think that there is a huge bubble formation in the stock market. And by which I mean both elsewhere as well as here. In fact, a very simple thing would be if somebody places, in fact, I've done that exercise myself, somebody places the number of deaths in a country in the x-axis and the stock market price in y-axis, you get a positive relationship. And that's actually funny, ludicrous. Is it a festival of death? This is absolutely correct. But we have, yes, there is this problem. But only thing being, there's one footnote to that fortunately we have not seen any financial institution going bankrupt. The financial institutions, additionally, if they go bankrupt, that would have been a deadly thing. So because of the huge impetus which the United States did, financially, institutions did not go bankrupt. So that's another positive spin-off of this particular policy. But yes, I agree that this was not expected to give a boost to the stock market. It was expected to give boost somewhere else. But that Mr. Trump is doing and Mr. Colin Powell is doing what he's doing.
Thank you, sir. Moving towards the next question. I think you have already answered the question of Mr. Shivashish Datta from Ramachandra College. Indian economy might face taxation-like situation going forward. It will have a negative impact on employment. At this juncture, the government should invest enormously on various sectors, ignoring the fear of fiscal deficit. Will it be possible for the government to contain the economic downturn?
I'll tell you, you recall my chart where I've shown government is not a magician who can create rabbit out of hat. Government at this juncture is extremely fearful. I'll tell you where from the fear comes in. The fear comes in from the rating agencies. There is a large belief among the global financial markets that there are elements of underestimation of India's fiscal deficit. So if what we see as 2.3, 2.4, if it turns out to be 4% center, another 3% states, so that's 7% fiscal deficit. If they go on spending still then what happens? Whether activity will come or not, I do not know. But I know of one thing, inflation will go up, one, and second, your rating will fall down. If your rating falls down, then there will be capital outflows. If there are capital outflows, there will be huge pressure on rupee. Rupee will be depreciating. It will move from 85, 77, 76, 77 to say 100. In that case, huge oil bill, India will be going for a crisis. So what I think what the government is doing, I think what they're doing, I have no clue what they're doing. So essentially, they're taking baby steps, looking at the market, and as I expect, there might be another fiscal stimulus might be in the offing. Government is also you understand the GST fiasco that is happening. In case of GST, the centers, the states can technically, they can take the center to the Supreme Court that the GST dues are not being paid to us. So government also has huge cash constraint. Okay.
Thank you, sir. My next question is from my another colleague, Professor Boishakhi Chakraborty. Do you think the random privatization, full or partial, at this juncture will financially strengthen the economy, or will it lead to loss of people's faith in government?
I object to the word random. I object to the word random because, look, why is government privatized? Because if you think that's one of the source of revenue of the government, since it's a key source of revenue of the government, they are taking that thing. They're taking that route. And if they do not privatize, anyway, those companies are not exactly the best of things. So I'm much more eclectic on privatization. I do not give it a, I understand a very, very blanket good or bad about privatization. I look at the company and then tell whether this is good or this is bad. So again, is this the right kind of time for the privatization? I do not know. But I know one thing, government doesn't have money and they are looking at every places wherever they can get money. Okay.
Thank you, sir. My next question from another colleague, Ipanita Chatterjee. Sir, your views are on if GOI would have infused more fiscal stimulus, what would it have been better in reviving the economy?
Yes. So if the fiscal stimulus, I am for what Professor Abhijit Banerjee said. You have to send some money directly to the people in this juncture, below a cut-off income level. No questions asked. No questions asked. Whether they are spending on food or alcohol, I don't care. I want demand to generate, and the best way to generate demand is directly giving some money to the poor. Not exactly commodities. I am aware of this. In a number of states, there have been free rations. So, people, I have heard from people who work in this area that they were flooded with quantities of rice, but they didn't have lentil too, or vegetables. So whenever we want to control the end use of resources, it becomes a problematic area. So I personally feel a direct income support scheme is preferable. There will be some leakage, but anyway, there are some leakage. Kaushik Basu has a famous saying. Somebody said, you know, that to Professor Basu, who was chief economic advisor at some point of time of Government of India, later the World Bank, my teacher. So Professor Basu was asked that, do you think that giving money directly to the poor, they are going to spend it on alcohol? So to which Professor Basu's reply was, the rich so far have been spending on alcohol on poor people's money. Let it be the poor turns. So it's fine. I mean, let them get the money. Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. My last question of the session from one student, Alina Ghazal, are transitional equity investment in investment banking an important factor in economic globalization?
This is a very specific question. This is not exactly this. Equity investment is part of globalization, yes. But at the same time, those of you are aware of, since you asked this question, I'm sure you're aware of, there is something called home bias. So home bias is a phenomenon that other things remaining same, an American is likely to invest in an American company and an Indian is likely to invest in an Indian company. So yes, equity investment, transitional equity investment there, but the lock-in period also is there. But difficulty with the lock-in period to make the transitional into permanent is the following, that whenever you impose any lock-in, money tends not to come at all. Which sector can make India gains in trade? I mean, that list was very clear. I mean, I'm sure you gain in trade, you are not referring to a stock market tip. Okay.
Okay, sir. There are so many questions, but we have to conclude due to time constraint. Thank you for your lucid explanation and answering all the questions very patiently. Now I am transferring it again to Arundhati ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Urmi Mukherjee and Professor Shyam Roy, for conducting the interactive session. And thank you, sir, for answering all our questions. May I now request Professor Shoshko Chakraborty, Head of the Department of Commerce, Afternoon and Evening Section, to please deliver the vote of thanks.
A very good evening to all. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. I, on behalf of the Bhawanipur Education Society College and on my own behalf, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Dr. Partha Ray for gracing this webinar and sharing with us his findings and opinions today. Thank you, sir, for your insightful discourse on today's topic. I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to the management for the perfect logistic support and guidance extended to all of us. My sincere thanks to our teacher in charge, Dr. Shuchandra Chakraborty, and our IQAC coordinator, Mr. Tathagata Sen, for their constant support and guidance. I thank Arundhati Mazumdar for anchoring the webinar splendidly. Special thanks goes to Gargi, our organizing secretary of this webinar, for her efforts and hard work. An event like this cannot happen overnight. It requires a keen planning, and we are fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated team members who did an excellent job. My thanks to Bornosri Chatterjee, Dr. Kolapi Banerjee, Shayan Roy, Shayan Basu, Nandini De, Devdeep Mal, and Dipandita Chatterjee. Last but not the least, I thank all my colleagues of the Bhawanipur Education Society College for attending this webinar, my dear students, and I also thank the distinguished participants from other colleges, universities. And once again, thank you, my students, for being such an interactive audience. Please do not forget to fill up the feedback forms in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So,
Thank you so much, sir, for the vote of thanks, and thank you, Dr. Ray, for gracing the occasion. And with that, we will conclude today's webinar.
okay.
Thank you so much once
Can I
again, sir.
leave now?
For
Can I leave
yes,
now? Oh,
yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
very much.
All participants.